Somebody has their phone, no, while I'm listening, I'm just checking my phone really quickly. That says something, right? No interruptions, no phones, and be able to let me know that you heard me by paraphrasing back what I said, right? These are important things. So that's what active listening is, right? And I know we're in a busy world. We're often asked to do many things at the same time. It's hard not to have your phone. Even sometimes as a presenter, I often bring my phone up here with me. It's usually for the time. I'm like, all right, how much time do I have? I want to make sure. But I'm very conscious of it. If I go into a meeting with somebody, I will let them know, hey, I have my phone with me. If it's an emergency, I'll say I'm waiting for something that might be, it's an emergency. So if I see their name on the screen, then I'll take it. If not, so if I glance over, I'm letting you know. But I do that at the start of a conversation to let the person know, you're the most important person right now, important person at this time, but this might be something I need to look at. Otherwise, anything else that I just want to check, now's not the time, right? So active listening. So good examples. Number 4, we want to validate emotions. All right, so validation is understanding. All it means is I can understand where you're coming from. I see this one trip up a lot of couples and parents and even individuals because they think validation means agreement. Validation doesn't mean agreement, right? Sometimes we don't agree with what the person says, but I can still understand your point of view. I can understand where you're coming from. That makes sense. And so this is an important piece. An example would be like, I understand you felt scared when I didn't answer your call or let you know that I was running late. The person might say, my phone dies three times a week. I always forget my charger. This has happened. You know that, right? So I don't think you should feel scared. But that would be an invalidating response, right? You can say, hey, it's a struggle for me to remember to charge my phone. But I understand that you were scared. I understand that you were scared that I didn't let you, So the person might think, it's not a big deal. I forget my charger. But if they responded that way, how do you think their partner would respond? Like, oh, you just forget your charger? Well, I'm waiting around, waiting for you to let me know if you're okay, right? So instead of skip that part and go to the, I understand why you were scared. I understand that you were scared that I didn't reach out to you. That's it. That's what validation is. You could not agree that your partner got as scared as they did, but that's not for you to determine your partner's emotion, right? It's just for you to understand. And you can come up with a solution later, right? But the idea is in this moment. So I'd like for you all to think about, again, with validation, what are some times that you might struggle maybe with understanding your partner because you don't agree with them? And so you feel like if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. If I tell them I understand, then they'll think, then my way wins. Did anyone think of a time? Yes?
Some partners may think if I validate them, they will take a privilege from them as an area of weakness.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes, so sometimes, thank you. So sometimes if we show understanding to our partner, they might take it as a privilege, as a weakness, like you've lowered your position, and now this is a point of power for the other person, right? And so it's easier to just say, that doesn't even make any sense, and completely pushing it aside. Can anyone else think of an example? Where it's difficult to validate?
I'm guilty of switching the phone, which I didn't realize that what I was doing to him, but like you get a call and like you're talking to your husband, and then the employer call and like I have to switch over real quick.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that made him feel devalued, so I had to go back and
Absolutely. Great example, and thank you for sharing. So in that moment, right, you were like, well, it's a work call. Obviously, I have to switch over, no worries, right? But he's taking it as, I'm not important, right? He's feeling devalued, like I'm not important because you are always switching over to somebody else's call. Somebody else is always more important, you're switching over. And so even though you're thinking, but I'm working, like it's not a big deal, that's not the point, right? It's not about the agreement. Like you're like, no, I don't think you're not important. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that person feels devalued. And we can understand that that person feels devalued, even if that's not what your intention is, even if that's not how you feel about them, that's not what it is. Validation is understanding the other person's point of view. And so like you said, thank you, that you were able to make that change once he pointed that out and you realized that you're like, oh, well, that wasn't my intention, right? So sometimes we have to look at, impact versus intention. We might not have the intention to harm, but if the impact is still harmful, then it is still worth making a change, right? So thank you. Okay, so last one, model non-judgmental responses, right? We want to model non-judgmental responses. We need to regulate our reactions in order for that to happen, right? We can't model non-judgment if we're not paying attention to our facial expressions. That's where we get hit the most a lot of times. Somebody says something and immediately our face goes, and we're like, no, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Well, your face said a lot, right? So we have to look at that. If your face is talking before your mouth, that's still a problem. So we need to regulate our reactions, right? So facial expressions and feedback, okay? So we're looking at the words that we're saying, the tone that we're using, even if the words that we're saying are nice, in quotes, right? We need to look at the tone and we need to look at the facial expression. And so if you can look up here to these faces, you can see some of them are smiling more than others, other ones are kind of like a neutral pleasant, and that's what we want to do. We want to kind of keep it neutral. Now you don't need to jump for joy, especially if somebody's telling you some negative feedback. You don't have to say, thank you. I'm so excited. Thank you. I'm so excited that you shared that. You don't have to be over the top about it, all right? But you do need to, again, try to take a deep breath and pause. And so tips for this are, again, take a deep breath, count to 5, keep your face neutral, and validate. Okay? So it's a lot easier if you know you're going into a difficult conversation to remind yourself to take that deep breath before. Right. So I know, for example, if I'm going into a tough conversation, I usually put an ice pack in my pocket because I get hot very quickly. I'm like, okay, I need an ice pack. And then I remember to take a deep breath. I'm like, all right, they're going to say some things that are probably going to be challenging, and I already know that. So if I know, I'm going to plan ahead. And I'm going to remind myself that I'm not going to say something unless I count to, we start with 5 for practice, and then we graduate to 3 seconds, right? Because it's a little bit more normal to be like, yeah, okay, all right. It's a little bit more normal. But when I have my clients in session, I actually start with 10. That one's really uncomfortable. Like, how are you? You have to wait 10 seconds before you can say, I'm good, how are you? So that's good practice. But for this, right, I want you guys to walk away with that. Take a deep breath, count to 5, keep your face neutral. You're paying attention. They're going to say some challenging things. It doesn't matter if I agree or not. I still want to do what? Even if I don't agree, what do I want to do? Validate, thank you, yes. So how would you respond if your partner asked, what do you think? So they're telling you about their problem, right? And then they end with, what do you think? What do you think a helpful response would be? The very first thing you.
I always say, it's important what you think, so you tell me what you think. And then I get him talk.
Okay, yes. So putting it back on the person, right? If they didn't already share a ton and they're kind of just gave you a little snippet and they're like, what do you think? And you're like, well, you know what? This is about you, right? That's great. So it lets the person know that they're important and you're wanting to hear them out, and that's great. What else can you do?
You can reiterate what you've heard them say and say, I think this is what you would like to, what you want to know.
Absolutely, right. It could even end with a question, right? So reiterate what they said, then paraphrase what they said. If they told you a whole thing and you're like, what are we trying to get out of this, right? Remind them, right? Like, okay, so it sounds like you are really struggling with work because your boss said, you know, that like we have to increase the numbers and people are getting layoffs, and you feel like if you were to cut back, then you might get laid off too, and that's really stressful because, you know, you're the head of the family. I get that. That makes sense. So you're paraphrasing back their whole thing. They might have told you about their whole entire day, but give them a little snippet, a little summary of what they said to let them know that you actually heard what they said, right? And then you're ending with either a question or like, you know, how can I help or what can I do or something, or putting it back on them.
Rephrasing is important, but without adding spices or flavor.
That's a great one. So rephrasing is really important, but without adding spices or flavor. Now, can you give me an example of what that sounds like?
Let's say partner is talking about something personal to his job, his family, and whatever, without focusing about the pronoun. The other partner maybe knows more about the background, so he or she wants to like push the other partner to the area that he wants by emphasizing on certain things with his perspective.
Right, so sometimes when we have a lot of information, we want to kind of steer the conversation a certain way, and we'll start saying extra pieces about that to try to get them to make that choice. Or if we want to have them make a certain choice, we'll say like, don't you remember this and this and this and this? It kind of sounds like that's the only answer. I don't know, what do you think? And it's like, we literally took them all the way there, right? And so we want to leave it open-ended. If we actually want people to, if we're trying to listen, we're trying to be non-judgmental and take in what our partner is saying, that means we're not adding all these extra pieces in there for other people to be confused, right? So excellent, right? So we want to make sure that it's, again, non-judgmental, We're just saying, what do you think? Again, paraphrase is a great thing. I love that none of you said solution, right, is the first answer, because that's not the first thing, right? When somebody says, what do you think? Sometimes it's kind of like a test, right, unintentional. We're not doing it on purpose, but the first answer usually shouldn't be a solution. A rephrase would be the best thing, a reframe, a summary, something, like, yeah, I understand, a validating statement, I understand how you can feel that way. Any of those would be the first appropriate answer as your first line. And then if they say, like, okay, so what should we do? And they follow up, it's like, oh, well, I mean, I would do this, but I don't know if that's comfortable for you, and so it's that open dialogue. But again, the first response usually isn't a solution, it's usually some sort of supportive statement. Okay, so to wrap it up, the idea is just consistency and reliability. So the 5 steps that we talked about are really important, but we can't just do them once. We can't say, like, I'm trying to get my partner to open up, I want them to be vulnerable with me, but they've only ever done it, once. If you show up consistently for your partner by being non-judgmental, right, by inviting them, by asking, by being curious and connecting with them, right, modeling that non-judgmentalness and validating. If you do that consistently over time, then your partner will trust, okay, well, this is not a one-off, right? Hey, we attended this lecture today at da-da-da, and you're like, okay, I'm really excited to use these tools, but then you just never came back to it, right? It has to be over time, and your partner will then trust that this is something that will continue to come. So think about this question. What can you do to help you feel safe when being vulnerable? So now this question is for you. What can you do to feel safe, right? We talked about how we can create an environment of safety for our partner, but I want you to think about what you could do so that you can feel safe when being vulnerable. Once again, if you can scan this, or if you already had it up, it should still be there, and once you let me know you're done scanning, I'll screen share. Everyone scan? Good, so they're coming in. So grounding, which is really important, being transparent, being authentic, creating a great atmosphere. Can someone explain what grounding is? Because that's a great answer. Yes?
Deep breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Some meditation.
Exactly, deep breathing, meditation. So grounding is all about body-based things, right? A lot of times we tend to be in our head. So like anxiety is fear about the future, which means there's no real threat right in front of you. It's about we're being worried about something that might happen, even if there's a high likelihood of it. And so grounding is all about, think about the actual ground, right? Like you are here, you are physically okay. And so it's about getting yourself back in your body and reminding yourself that you are safe in this moment. And so deep breathing can help regulate your nervous system, doing some meditation, right prayer. There's a lot of things that can be done. So grounding is great. Thank you. Let's see, expressing the type of support that you want. Exactly. We are not mind readers. Sometimes we need somebody to let us know. Again, is it solution? Is it venting? Especially, I'm going to point this out, if there's a particular situation where you know you always want a solution or you always want venting, go ahead and share that with your partner, right? For example, when I used to come home from work, there was a period of time where we had a lot of, like the director, they kept quitting because it was a very tough job. And so every time I would come home, I'm like, wow, it's stressful. There's constant turnover. I have to train new people. It was really challenging. So when I would come home, sometimes I would call a family member and I'm like, okay, let me tell you about today's day. And they'd be like, well, did you try this? Did you try that? And I'm like, hold up, I already know what to do. They're just not good answers, right? It's go to the director, go to the CEO. Okay, I can do that, but that's not really an easy answer. And sometimes I just wanted to vent. So after a while, when I would get really angry and kind of annoyed, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna let you know, when I call after work, if I'm calling on my ride home from work, it's not a solution time, it's a venting time. And I'm like, please, please when I call after work, hey, I'm leaving work. I just want to vent. I just want you to listen and be like, wow, that really sucks. That's really tough. Thank you. That's all I wanted. I feel better now. Thank you. Right? right? Because sometimes it wasn't something that could fix, right? I'm not gonna randomly hire the director tomorrow at the, place. It still takes 90 days to train a new person. There's not really much we can fix with that, right? And so sometimes it's just letting it out. So if I know that that situation was going to be a recurring event, then I would just tell my loved ones, like, hey, like at this time, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So they don't even have to ask at that point. I say I'm coming home from work, what do? Venting and listening, thank you, that's it. So, making it clear and transparent that you're only venting, exactly, expressing the type of support, understanding others are different, breathing, being neutral, right? Yep, again, neutral language, neutral facial expression, neutral tone, being mindful, knowing your limits and boundaries is super important. So can somebody tell me, like, how do you know what your limits and boundaries are? What would be something that we could do to help you out, to be vulnerable in that? Can anyone expand on that? Doesn't have to be the one, if you're the one who wrote that up, you don't have to be the one to say it. But how can using limits and knowing what your limits and boundaries are, how can that be helpful for you? Yes.
I think boundaries here would be your ability to expect what you will listen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable to listen this, I'm not comfortable to listen this.
Absolutely. So knowing which topics, for example, are okay, are safe enough for you to listen to. So when you go into a situation, if you know when they start talking about this particular thing, like, I'm not ready to handle that, that's really important. So if the conversation ends up steering towards that, you can simply say, hey, excuse me, I'm not really comfortable talking about that right now. Like, that would be too much for me. It's important, maybe we want to talk about it, but not right now. And so it's okay. So if you know that in advance, remember, a lot of what we're saying is if I know this in advance, if I take a deep breath before the conversation, right? If I know that it's difficult, I know which boundaries I have, then I'm not limiting it. I also use boundaries when it comes to interruptions, right? So sometimes you have to know, like, how many interruptions are you willing to tolerate, right? That's something that can get frustrating if somebody continues to interrupt. So for me, I kind of do like a 2 to 3 rule, right? If somebody interrupts twice, then I say, okay, you know what, now is not time for the conversation. After 2, so you get 2 interruptions, but then after that, I'm ending the conversation. Because at 3 is when my emotional level gets higher. And I can respond if you don't get to 4, but I'm not gonna risk it. I'm not gonna risk getting to 3 because 3 could lead to 4. So I stop at 2. There, okay, you know what, it sounds like, this is not a conversation where we're both going back and forth. So maybe we can talk about this another time then, right? And that's helpful to kind of share. Do you have something else?
So it's interesting, it's mentioning the know your limits and boundaries and what we just talked about.
Yeah.
But how does that compare in relations to when, not so much of an interruption, but more of an invalidation? So you know your limits, and in your example saying that, hey, I don't think I can have
Yeah.
the bandwidth to deal with this right now.
Yes.
Is that exactly how you say it verbatim without making the other person feels invalidated, like, oh, you don't care?
It's usually something you've already talked about before, right? Like, you know that this is a difficult conversation for your partner, and they're trying to sneak it into the conversation you're already having, right? So typically, for example, if we're having a conversation about a particular topic, we say, hey, remember, we want to invite, right? First one, we want to invite, we don't demand. So we'll say, hey, are you open to having a conversation about XYZ right now? If the person says yes, then they go off track and they're like, yeah, now that we're talking, and you're like, whoa. When I invited you to share, right, like you're thinking in your head, when I invited you to share, I wasn't ready for all of this. I was ready for this particular thing. So that's what typically happens. Like, well, we already opened the can of worms. Let's just get everything out on the table. But you might not be emotionally available for that. And it's important for you to know your boundary. So another boundary would be your emotional boundary, that I'm not ready to handle that right now. So if we start the conversation with that topic, you agree to it, then it might just be, hey, like, I know we're still talking about this, but like, let me grab an ice pack. Let me get a glass of water. Let me go do something. But I know we're still talking about this. This is really important. So you can still stay in the conversation, right? I say this for, again, if we're talking about one thing and then we tend to jump to 3 other things. And remember that time when, and then we start going off track. That's when I would say, keep it this. So it wouldn't be invalidating in that sense. But I understand what you mean. If the second somebody says something, if your first response is, we can't talk about that, well, that's not your first response then. What did we say the first response is? Validating, right? Thank you for sharing that. That's really important. I know we need to talk about that, but remember this conversation I opened up about this topic. Can we please stick to that now, and we can talk about that one later, right? It's a way to say, I heard you. I know that's important, but we said we're talking about this right now. Can we please stick to this? So you're still inviting and not demanding, but you are redirecting on purpose, right? But good question. Yeah. Ask my partner to listen without judging or providing solutions before, exactly. So asking for what you need. So great responses, everybody. Thank you. So, key takeaways, this is everything that we talked about. But again, these are the five things that I want you guys to practice. So, inviting, right, not demanding. We want to ask, right? Again, do we want solutions? Do we want venting? We want to connect over correct. A lot of times when somebody has, even if somebody's telling you a story and you think like, well, they missed a part of it, like let me tell them why they're wrong, or let me tell them the part that's not correct. Still start with validation first. Okay, so it made you angry when I did X, Y, Z, right? Even if you're like, I'm not the one who did that. Don't start with that, right? And you're like, but if I told them I'm not the one who did it, then they won't be mad anymore. They're still angry. Trust me, the emotion doesn't dissipate just like that. So start with, oh, you're angry because, when you received that text, it came from my phone and I'm the one who sent it, right? Okay, I understand. That really sucks. If I got that text, I would be mad too. I want to let you know, one of our kids grabbed the phone and they sent that text to you, just so you know it wasn't me, and I did tell them that they can't use my phone next time. Oh, they sent it, right? But first, I was only able to listen to you because you validated me first. You understood that anyone who receives that text would get angry. Anyone who received that would be thinking that's difficult. Does that make sense? So get curious, actively listen. You want to validate their emotions, it makes sense, and then show non-judgment. Control your reactions. Okay. And that's it. Questions? Yeah, so we'll do questions.